back. You're watching this special transmission on the budget 2023-2024. I'm Omar Khalid, and we are discussing a lot of different angles to the budget 2023-24 with respect to the Pakistan Economic Survey 22-23, with respect to the different decisions that have been taken by the government, with respect to also the confirmation that the Prime Minister has just a few minutes back given for the budgetary proposals in a cabinet meeting, and then he addressed that cabinet meeting and talked about the different incentives that the government wants to go for, and the economic situation in the country and what happened in the last few years, or last year specifically, and what brought the country to the current situation. We've been joined in the studios by Dr. Shimail Daud. He's an economist and president of the Rawalpindi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's in the studios with us. Online, we've been joined by two guests, Dr. Usman Chohan, he's a leading economist, and Muhammad Shaaf Najeeb, who himself is an economist as well. Thank you very much to the both of you to have joined us. This is going to be interesting. Let's begin with you, Shimail. We were talking before the break, because this is a transmission that has been going on. We saw our Prime Minister talk about budget 2023-24. We talk about the different important aspects of that budget and what the government is emphasizing on. One of the sectors that he emphasized on was the IT sector. Yes. How important is it for our youth and also for nation building and our economy?
Omar, obviously it is very promising as a sector, and also because in this region we have seen tremendous success across the border in India. There is a missed opportunity, so I think in these testing times it doesn't require a lot of energy. We already have the skill set. It just requires the sort of support and guidance from the government, and I think we hear that there's going to be specifically tax holiday or specifically budget within the budget provisions which would incentivize further growth in this sector. I just wanted to mention that I have played my role in different segments related to technology, and within the HEC I've seen personally a part of that team that looks or steers the Technology Development Fund. We've seen projects grow, and we've seen that these are the sorts of projects where innovative projects could be local products, local solutions, or it could be global problems and solutions for them. But these are the sorts of dividends which can bring in revenues for Pakistan, respect, and at the same time recognition. And I think that I'm in favor of not providing blanket subsidy to any sector, but having sort of hand-holding and having supervision, so that there is growth, but there is in such a way that it is not taken advantage of, but we see dividends where you're kind of like following up with the targets and indicators and so forth and so on. So we've seen in terms of the HEC Technology Development Fund, out of 280 plus projects where patents have been produced, they've started coming into solutions which are either saving in terms of import substitution, where instead of relying on inexpensive imports, we are looking for alternates or components that can be manufactured in Pakistan. That is the sort of approach I think within IT and related technology-based solutions, where I think that can really go a long way, where we are trying to conserve our expensive currency. I think that definitely is going to be a welcome for the budget.
All right. Let's come to our two guests who are waiting for us patiently online. Let's begin with Usman Chohan. Usman, thank you very much to have joined us. Usman, 14 trillion rupees budget that is going to be announced very shortly. I don't know how much time we have for our discussion. Nevertheless, a lot of challenges that remain, and a lot of key emphasis that is being given to women, to the agriculture sector, to the IT sector, to increase in salaries, to the youth. How important is this budget as a layman, as an economist, for the people of Pakistan under the current circumstances?
Thank you. It's a very important document in terms of what our next year will look like. The past year has been a difficult one for much of the world, not just us. And if our budget is to reflect an optimism, it will be in the fact that we are trying to address specific sectors to jumpstart what has been a very difficult post-COVID year. As you and I keep talking about, So the areas that the government is prioritizing are ones that seem very quick fix, like let's get started on the fast stuff. But you know what? Our economy as a whole needs a comprehensive overhaul in terms of improving every single sector. The budget here doesn't look at everything adequately, so I would have, for example, wanted us to look at all sectors rather than expecting specific sectors to be able to revive as fast. There's a difference of opinion on that, that's all.
All right, Shaaf, what are your expectations from this budget?
Uh, well, Umar, as you said that this is going to be a 14 trillion budget. And if I have heard correct, the development budget has been set at over 1 trillion. So I think the major concern and the major thing that I'd be looking at is how the government is going to manage its deficit and what deficit is it expecting. And I think that is going to be very important with regards to the deal with the IMF after the budget and then financing support from all the other countries. So I think we managed to curtail some of the budget deficit as well as the primary deficit was changed into the primary surplus in this running financial year. So I think it's very important how we are going to sustain that. And that's something what I'm going to look forward to, how they're looking to manage that financing gap in this coming budget.
All right, Usman, a lot of talks are being made as far as, increasing the tax net is concerned. It is being said that there is a proposal of imposing new taxes in this current budget as well. How important is the taxation for a country like Pakistan?
You know, it's extremely important, and the fact that the government is putting emphasis on it is very good. The thing is, we have focused for a long, long time, for decades upon the tax depth rather than the tax breadth. So the proposals that the government is doing also scare somebody who's a tax expert, and I wouldn't claim to be a tax expert, but it scares them in the sense that it's more depth, so it squeezes existing things much more. Even if you add new taxes, the target areas tend to be generally the same ones that were previously targeted. And tax breadth is what we're missing right now, and I would like us to all have that tax effort, that contributory sentiment, because that will make it easier for everybody to play their part and make budgets more realistic and achievable as well.
All right, Shaaf, how important will be the role of creditors in the coming months and in the year that follows? We've had our Prime Minister, Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, while approving the budgetary proposals, saying that he has had a conversation with the IMF head and that he's looking forward to the EFF facility being provided to Pakistan by the end of the month. How important is the relationship that we have with the IMF under the current circumstances and in the light of the budget that is going to be presented as well?
I think it's very important how things are going forward with the IMF, and the Prime Minister's statement right now after the cabinet session was important regarding that. So I think even the IMF would be listening this budget very carefully, because I think they would be looking at how this budget, is in line with whatever we want to achieve in the coming year regarding our financing assurances from IMF and other as well. And I think that, adding on to what Dr. Usman just talked about, I think in our quest to increase revenue, we should not just look to increase the tax base, but I think we should also look towards exploring non-tax revenues. Like, as for instance, there are over 1.4 trillion government housing assets that are underutilized. There's a lot of government land and debt capital that's underutilized, and I think that's something in these difficult circumstances the government must look to explore in this upcoming budget, in this upcoming financial year, so that without adding on any further tax burden onto the existing taxpayer, it is able to increase its revenues, which is something which will send a very positive message towards the creditors as well, to show that the government is looking not just to increase its revenues and reduce deficit, but also to come up with new ways in which to manage economy and to increase revenues while also providing greater opportunity for economic activity.
Shimail, let's come to you, and I'd like to understand the whole aspect of subsidies as far as the budget is concerned, and of course our economy is concerned. How important is the removal or not of the subsidies as far as Pakistan's economic outlook is concerned and the future of strengthening Pakistan's economy is concerned, and also giving the budgetary proposals and the budget into consideration?
So for the first and foremost thing to understand is that if subsidy was given to a sector which was giving productivity, then it would make sense. So for example, in the past we've seen that subsidy was given to exporters, focused on textiles, or let's say if the government allows in budget, for example, to the IT or anything. So anything that is increasing our exports or increasing our productivity makes sense. But if subsidy is being passed to any segment of society which is just consuming, that means there is no productivity or nothing to add to our reserves. That is where there is a difference of opinion when it comes to IMF or when it comes to the creditors, where they say that you should not be passing, this expensive, debt, and you should not be wasting this, or so forth and so on. So, and that means that increases our expenditures, but it does not increase our revenue. So subsidy is definitely detrimental for the fiscal deficit. It's definitely not recommended, and I think the government has gradually started to take back its space. Having said that, because the public and at large for decades was used to a lot of these subsidies, when they are removed, it increases their cost of living, it increases the inflation, and puts pressure on their income. So having said that, as this is going to be a difficult time, I think with the trend that there has been, the government is going to make sure right now, because they are sharing the budget with IMF, I think there is going to be a similar trend where subsidies will not be encouraged or will further be reduced or removed if there remains any segment which has been overlooked.
All right, the next question is to all three of the guests, beginning with you, Usman. The government is forecasting a positive economic outlook for next year, growth target of 3.5%. How achievable is it?
Achievable for two reasons. One is that we are starting from a base year that has been a bad one, so it will look better naturally. It's possible in that sense. Second, our population is growing at 2 to 3% per year. I mean, the simple fact is that economic activity, by its very nature, even if it's unregulated, even if it's not at its optimum, is still happening. So 3% is not too high, and if you look at it in per capita terms, if your population grows at 3% and your economy goes at 3%, then your per capita GDP grew at 0. So I would actually want our growth figures to be much, much higher to be able to absorb the sort of population cohorts that come in. 250 million people growing at 3% means you're adding 75 lakh people per year. So the challenge is very, very daunting, and we tend to look at it from quarter to quarter, but we have to look at it from generation to generation.
Okay, Shaaf, what's your take on that?
Well, as far as the positive economic outlook is concerned, right, what I think it's achievable. But the big question that comes in that is, how are we going to do that? And of course, we have to open our imports for that. With that comes the question, do we have the reserves to back that or not? And it brings me to the point that I just shared earlier, that we need to secure our, you could say, IMF, the loan from the IMF, and then financing from other donor countries as well. Because without that, we will not have the reserve base to finance those imports. So I think if we are able to manage our financing gap, if we have financing assurances from IMF and the other countries, then I think this is something that we can actually, you could say, we can achieve not 3%, but maybe even slightly more than that. But the first thing is managing the financing gap so that we can lift up the restrictions that we have put up on imports, which has essentially actually held our economy back in this running financial year. Because without imports, a lot of our industries would not work. A lot of our other economic sectors have died down due to restrictions on imports due to a very depleting reserve situation of the country. So I think that's very important in this. And then if we manage to do that, then 3% growth will be achievable for us in the coming economic year.
All right, I'll have to come to the current account deficit and the import curtailing, but in the next phase. Here, Shimail, do you agree or disagree with Usman and Shaaf?
I think they're right on the spot as far as I think there's going to be 3.5% is going to be achievable. The issue is not about growth. We can achieve even a higher growth. The issue is about not heating up the economy, because our economy is dependent on imports, specifically vis-a-vis our exports. Our consumption is also a lot of our things that we consume. We are one of the highest consumers per capita in terms of edible oil. So a lot of things are imported. So we have to make sure that our growth is such that it is the sweet mix. And I think 3.5% is kind of in the middle. And I think it's going to be achievable. The question is that within this, does the import compression would that continuously be maintained, and would that continuously lead to, because there was a reduction in terms of our exports, can we still manage to jack up our exports and manage this 3.5% growth?
All right, my next question concerns the current account deficit, the compression of the imports, and decrease in dependence as far as outside revenues are concerned or external sources are concerned. How can we move around while maintaining a certain equilibrium as far as our current economic situation is concerned, so that we can go forward with a positive outlook in the current fiscal year? I'll begin with you, Usman.
Thank you. I agree with both of my colleagues. The import paradigm is very, very important to drive exports as well as growth, and it shouldn't be consumption driven. That's the first point. I would add that you have to indigenize your value chains, because a lot of the things that we add into the supply chain going to the end product which we export has a foreign component, and it isn't necessary. There is adequate natural and labor endowments here to have a lot of things done here. And then you export that, and that will give you more of a clean capture of the final value of the goods that you produce or the services that you deliver. So indigenization is a big part of it, but it requires hard work, and we have been quite lazy with that. Laziness means that it's easier to grab something from abroad, and it's harder to do things at home, but it is worth it to do things at home economically.
Oh, let's Shaaf.
Well, I think, Omar, in this financial year, we missed a lot of our targets, and we did not miss them by just a very small number. We missed them by a mile. But I think something that we achieved this year as per the targets was reducing our primary deficit and changing into even if a small surplus, and then of course reducing our fiscal deficit in that as well. And that has been possible to an extent due to the reduction in our current account balance as well. But we have to realize that once we start opening up our imports, that can make this all go back as well, right? So for that, it's very important that we start producing more to be able to export more. But I think in this context, as Dr. Usman talked, we have to sort of stop looking at milestones in a single year's context. We have to look at how we plan on achieving over the next 5 to 10 years, and then plan our yearly economic goals as per that. So when we're talking about exports, it's not going to happen overnight because we have a great productivity problem, but it has to start today. And when we're talking about increasing our productivity, it's all making our exports more feasible to reduce our current account balance, current account deficit. We must realize the problems of our energy sector that actually increase the cost of production of our products as well, and hence make them, whatever we might be producing, unfeasible for that. So I think it's very important that we set 5 to 10 year goals, economic goals, and then in achieving that, we set yearly milestones. So maybe over the next, let's say 1 or 2 years, if we want to increase our industrial growth, we want to increase our large scale manufacturing, which this year decreased by over 8%. So we need to grow, we need our large scale manufacturing to grow. So of course that will initially have a negative impact on our imports through increased machinery imports and all. But if we look at in context of maybe let's say over the next 3 to 5 years, then we'll start to realize that yes, that is giving us the benefits that we look for. So budget, it's more of an accounting exercise, much less of an economic exercise. The economic exercise comes before that, and of course it gives the signals about what we want to do in our economic policies in the coming year. So I think the focus of our economic policies must shift from 1 year to a long-term policies, and then achieving those milestones that we set for ourselves each year, and then we can have a consistent decrease in our current account balance as well, in our fiscal deficits as well.
All right, Shimail, what's your take on all of this?
Well, building upon what he said, I think I would go even further, that the milestones need to be set on a quarterly basis. So you look into the future and then you work backwards, and then you set those milestones. And I want to hone upon that, typically in the budget, obviously macroeconomically, a lot of those targets are set, but we are always missing the micro level working details or execution. So I think if the government is really serious to take us out of this ditch, they have to really focus on working at the micro level, hand holding, as I mentioned before, and then focusing and building upon that. The value chains, I totally agree with that point. A lot of the products can be manufactured here. We have the skill, we have the it's a lot of things don't require high-tech, industry, but it's just the awareness and sort of working together. What that means is that the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Finance and a lot of those industry people need to get out of their offices and actually really work very closely with these industries and give them set targets and make them work. That is a sort of approach which we will start getting results that we want to save and have our productivity and create products that will then be able to trade across in the regional level.
All right. Productivity, targets, long-term goals, short-term goals. What happens usually is that governments change and all the policies economically or otherwise that had been brought forward by the previous government are more or less put aside to bring in new policies, and thus there is an impetus, there is a certain full stop or a pause to all the long-term goals that any government can put forward for the betterment of the society. Does that need to change? Usman?
It absolutely needs to change, and it is not just an economic paradigm, it is actually a cultural paradigm. It's a value systems thing. Because in a society that is productive, it's from the top all the way down that people do things, they do things well. This is to say that even janitorial services type work will be done with a sense of strong work ethic, all the way up to large scale, high tech, whatever, semiconductor style manufacturing will be done with a strong, robust work ethic, with a sense of efficiency, with a sense of purpose. So I think it is a cultural problem, and for that to transform, you actually need positive role models to be more visible. They are there. They have to be more visible. Other people should wish to have that mimetic imitation of that strong work ethic, and it spreads across society. And the idea of the colonial mindset, which still is a virus that many societies still live with 100 years after colonialism, of just sitting around on a desk and just telling others what to do and they don't do it, that parasite has to be removed towards a dynamic and competitive society driven by a strong work ethic. This is not our problem, this is across the world, but it is particularly marked in a society like ours, this cultural problem.
So what I mean to ask is, do we need to have long-term policies also that need to be sustained and maintained by all consecutive governments, which policies that are for the betterment of the society?
Absolutely. So policy consistency is, as you correctly identified as well, earlier as well, is a serious issue with us in the sense that we always start from the drawing board every single time, whereas other societies set these targets and they keep them for a generation. They have a vision 20x, 2100 or so on. So because they set long-term targets, then changes of government or leadership still do not mean disruptions to the long-term goals, and it actually makes their job easier after. So going to the drawing board every X quarter, every X year is very difficult, and it makes us lose sight of the bigger questions. So you're right.
All right, Shaaf, we used to have 5-year plans at one time. 5-year brilliant plans that were adopted by countries such as the Republic of Korea, South Korea, and they have really gone up the charts of the world economy because of the 5-year plans that we made. Which brings me again to the same question that I asked Usman: long-term plans versus short-term plans for our economic upheaval.
Well, Omar, it's very unfortunate for us here in Pakistan that political changes bring about some sort of policy changes as well, and it's not just slight changes. We're talking about massive policies changes which actually stop anything that was started by the previous government, and it is not something restricted to just one political party or just one government. This has been happening again and again over the last 3 to 4 decades, as we have witnessed, and that is what has held Pakistan back, and that policy inconsistency is what is holding local as well as foreign investors back as well from investing in Pakistan. We can look at our neighboring country India in this context. India went to the IMF, but it started its reform program. And when it did, when Manmohan Singh came in as the finance minister in the early 90s, they continued with those macroeconomic policies for now nearly 3 decades. So in that, there has been governments of Congress, there have been governments of BJP, there have been government where Manmohan Singh has been the finance minister and eventually the prime minister, but there have also been governments where he was in part. But the reform process that he started there, that reform process was not reversed back by any subsequent government. pyramids. Instead, they further built upon that. And right now we can see how on a macro level, despite all of its micro level issues, whether it's talking about human rights violations against Muslims or maybe the violations that's doing in Kashmir or other societal issues, on a macro level, it has achieved the stability that it is one of the desired destinations for a lot of investors in the coming years. So it might even be challenging China as the world's leading market. So Pakistan can learn and Pakistan must learn from that. Political changes must not equate to policy changes. We have seen in Great Britain very recently after the Brexit referendum, they have had very frequent prime minister changes, but that has not made any impact on their policies because the policies have continued the way they should have. And in that, I would say the role of the parliament becomes very important. The parliament needs to keep a check on policies. That is where the policy must be derived from and driven from. But unfortunately, the role of parliament has been over the last couple of decades or even longer than that been very limited in Pakistan. And I think it's important that the parliament takes up its role to manage and monitor the policy and its implementation so that even with political changes, there aren't any major policy changes that could hurt our macroeconomic stability and macroeconomic progress.
All right, Shimail, what's your take on all of this, long term versus short term?
Well, I think that as we've seen that there has been maturing though over the years where political parties have set forth manifestos and they've started at least writing those objectives. I think now it's time that the public also starts looking at criteria and look at outcomes, outputs, and hold them accountable, hold the leadership of any political party accountable that they have to perform. Obviously, as I mentioned before, that all of these issues are strategic, they're existential, and now it's no more a joke where you could just dismantle projects without merit. So there should be a system in place where any project, if it needs to be discarded or dismantled, there should be demerits and they need to be discussed in a public hearing. Without that, it should not be able to, no government, political government otherwise could be able to stop the projects which have good outcomes for the government and for the nation. So that is a sort of approach, and I think a lot of people did talk about the Prime Minister, including I think a lot of chambers, and I was part of those initiatives where we tried to push the Charter of Economy, but things didn't work out as we wanted to. I hope that as the elections come forth, at least there should be some talk on this and there should be consolidation on this, that there will be no political blaming and no political mileage on the basis of dismantling projects which are giving dividends to the country and to the nation.
All right. Consolidation, I think, is a very important word, and I think that needs to be put into different context. And I hope everybody who is listening, whether they be from the economic or the political world, understand the importance of it in the current situation that Pakistan is facing. The fiscal deficit target has more or less been set at 7.7% of the GDP. How can we address fiscal deficit and expand our tax net? Usman.
A lot of our conversation is about raising revenues, but I actually think it's much better and much more important to look at the expenditure side. The question is a question of public value creation. Does the kind of expenditure we have on such a large government, provincially, federally, create value for the public? Most people you would ask would say no. So the fact is that we are probably not spending in an efficient way across public services in the public interest and for the public good. So I actually think the better fix is to have more focus on the expenditures. That will automatically make even a low tax effort look pretty good, because unless your public formations and institutions create value for the public, you don't need to spend so much on them. And some institutions are very large relative to the value they provide. So I think that if in terms of fiscal deficit, too much is about tax, and then in that too much is about squeezing the little salaried class to the hilt, and I think it's very unfair. Ours, in terms of the principles of taxation, the 7 things that it should be fair, neutral, etc., we don't adhere to any of them. So I actually think expenditure is the bigger thing for us to look at now, and you can actually achieve more from that.
All right, Shaaf, what's your take on that?
I think I absolutely agree with Dr. Usman on this, because as we see the IMF, World Bank, and all the other donor agencies, global financial agencies, they always focus on increasing the tax revenues, right? Because that's a very short-term fix on that, because we might be able to achieve a single year's, you could say, target of revenue for that. But the increase in the increase in the tax rates actually proves to be counterproductive always, because because it's an incentive to not invest in the economy, right? So, and unfortunately, at a time when we have been trying again and again to raise our revenues, our expenditures have been increasing many folds. And be it the government, be it the IMF, be it the World Bank, no one has discussed that, no one has paid any heed to that. But I think it's time that the government starts looking towards reducing its expenditure, and it has to start from its own home. It has to reduce the number of ministries at the federal level as mandated in the 18th Amendment. It has to merge, it has to reduce its footprint within the economy, because right now the footprint of the government is over 60% of the GDP in the economy. It has to revisit its role, whether it wants to be an active player in the economy or whether it has to adequately regulate and facilitate economic activity. The government agencies and public sector enterprises, they are a huge burden on the government and on the exchequer, and that has been bleeding our economy dry. And it's time that the government decides what agencies it wants to keep, and the ones that it has to keep, they must be through an independent governing board that they should be governed. On the others, it needs to decide what need to be privatized and what need to be shut down if need be. Because unless we reform these major expenditure heads, we will not be able to reduce our fiscal deficit even slightly on a consistent basis. And then further, the major issue is the pension reforms, of course, because we have a large government size and we might be giving them very good salaries right now, but that is the liability for the future as well. So the pension must be fully funded, and it must be contributory from here on. That is a reform that's very necessary, because if we do not do that, if we do not bring in pension reforms as well, the government will not be left with much money to pay its other dues in the coming years, because that's how extravagantly or exponentially the pension bill is increasing. So these are the areas that the government must look towards. And as Shimail has been talking about, revisiting the subsidies that we have given. We have given over 200 rupees, over 200 billion rupees to fertilizer, but that hasn't given us much benefit. We have been giving energy subsidy, but research suggests that that subsidy has been benefiting those more who have been using a lot of high energy units instead of those who have been using low. So our subsidies, they are not giving extending benefit to those who they are intended towards. So I think these are the areas that the government must look towards on an emergency basis, so that it is able to reduce its expenditure, while it must also look towards reducing the regulatory sludge, as we call it, the number of permissions that you have to take to start any economic activity, make any investment, and also the time that it takes. For instance, if I want to invest in a high rise, there are 50 plus NOCs that I need to take. It takes me over 2 years to get those permissions. So in 2 years, we have seen how it takes just one small virus to, drastically change the entire economy of the world. What could happen in the 2 years is it could change the entire investment plan. Things that are feasible could go on to become unfeasible, or even with how the world is changing in today's world of IT, things might even become outdated in that time. So I think these are the areas that the government must immediately focus on an emergency basis if it wants to reduce its fiscal deficit, if it wants that the economic activity resumes and it booms in the coming years, and so that we reduce our dependency on the foreign sources in terms of loans and other aid, and we are able to, become the Asian tiger that we have always aimed for.
All right, Shimail, what's your take on this whole conversation?
I just want to pick up on one of the words that was used, regulatory sludge. It's a very interesting word. Our textiles, when they compete with Bangladesh, the lag time is in months. Where we get our imports, it takes a couple of months, whereas they are able to turn around those imports into exports within a month. So if there is a period of, or a lag of 3 to 4, 5 months, I mean, that is a sort of, regulatory sludge. I want to mention that we need to really slice that off, and I totally agree. Now, how we're going to achieve that is very important. If the government sets a target that we want to reduce our footprint, let's say, in the next 5 years, 1% per year in the next 10 years, let's say 10%. So instead of 60%, we come down to 50%. How is that going to be achieved? So we really need to converge, merge, and bring technology and get rid of the archaic regulatory frameworks that are holding back our outputs. And people should be based, and they should be progressing through their careers based on performance, and not the typical old archaic ACR sort of system where you get in line and you are going to make your way anyway, even if you don't perform anything. So people should be able to raise up the ladder into their careers based on their performance and outcome. Until and unless you do that, there is no incentive for the bureaucracy or the machinery that really makes things happen. And that is why it is really, it's sagging down, and it is taking the country down with it.
All right, my next question pertains to the Economic Survey 2022-2023, because of the fact that it talks about the issues that pertain to Pakistan's economy in the previous fiscal year, and this is more or less will be what the new budget will be based on to tackle those. The real GDP 0.29% in fiscal year 2023. GDP current market prices stood at 84,657.9 billion in fiscal year 2023, which shows a growth of 27.1% over the last year. Per capita income $1,568 compared to $1,765 last year. Investment to GDP ratio 13.6% in the fiscal year 2023 compared to 15.6% in fiscal year 2022. Growth of agriculture sector estimated 1.55%, industrial sector negative growth 2.94%, services sector 0.86% growth. When you look at the growth in different sectors, what needs to be done in order to boost the growth where it hasn't where much hasn't happened? Usman.
A lot of the factors that underpin this problem have already been covered in our rich discussion today, but it has to do with, for example, the imports not coming in. It has to do with the policy inconsistency. It has to do with the instability. It has to do with the prioritization of subsidies to unproductive sectors, the sludge, etc. There's quite a few things that you have to look at that explain what are ultimately condensed accounting figures. And yes, as was previously correctly mentioned, budgeting is an accounting exercise, more so than an economic exercise, and these numbers will be disputed. These numbers will be disputed by the foreign agencies as well as by local observers, because the fact is that we are a big economy. We are not as complex an economy as we should be, but the fact is we live in a data-loose society, so we don't actually ever know the full picture. But the fact is that to drive growth, you have to have the strong foundations. And of course, the international economic situation has had a very damaging effect for many countries. So that's why, as you and I have talked previously, I have much better sentiment towards the future, because simply things are likely to be better for the whole world going forward, and we should benefit from that. And then we have to look at the deeper questions as we have discussed so far.
All right, Shaaf.
Well, I think Dr. Usman rightly covered it, that not only have we discussed in this, but I think what's very important in this context is the signaling from the government and all the political forces has to be very positive. Because at a time when political stakeholders are involved in infighting, and they're busy in power struggle, the message that it sends not just to foreign investors and foreign economic players, but even to the local economic players, that is not very good, and that is actually something that pushes people away from economic activity. Those who have the power, they would want to exit Pakistan. The overseas Pakistani who might be looking towards coming to Pakistan, investing here, they take a step back. They try to see out this political unstable situation. So I think it's very important that along with this budget in the coming months, the message from all political stakeholders has to be very positive. It has to be very pro-economy, and economy needs to be put at the forefront. Economy needs to be the focus of all of our discussions, of all of our policies in the coming months, because without that, the future for Pakistan would be very bleak. We haven't lost it all at this time. We are going through a very difficult time, but I must say that we have our future in our own hands, and we have to take a decision. Do we want to keep suffering like we have, or do we want to start a process of reform? Do we want to start a process of progress? It won't happen overnight, but it has to start now.
Exactly. There needs to be a starting step somewhere. Yes, Shimail.
Well, I think building upon what the government has achieved till now, going forward, I think, as mentioned by both our other colleagues, that we will see good days. But the question arises, we have seen these ups and downs, these boost and the bust cycles and boom and bust cycles. But every time when we start having good days, then we lose. We do not take the advantage, we do not do the reforms, we do not build our reserves. I hope that this time we will not lose, and this time there will be some seriousness on part of the state. I have to use the word state, no more governments, whichever government comes in power. We have to make sure that we build ourselves, we have a cushion which we can fall upon, or if need be, and build that sovereign fund which can help us overcome this. Now, for example, it was mentioned about the pension. Well, we know that different companies, even at the corporate sector, they build their reserves, and it is a requirement that they put aside a money, and it's fixed and so forth and so on. So on when they have to make sure that they have to take care of their liabilities in terms of payments to their employees, they make sure that their funds have been growing. Why doesn't the government do that? Why do they have to every time budget it? Why shouldn't it be fixed? Why shouldn't they put aside through those pension funds? A lot of the countries around the world do it in different 401ks, and different countries have different sovereign funds where they put aside this money, and they make sure that throughout the careers and lives of different people, they put aside, and the companies they work in or the organizations that work in put aside those funds, and then later on that acts as the fund which generates those pensions. We have EOBI, we have Social Security, but somehow we always find out about the different scandals. We never find out about how they have contributed to the exchequer, how they have contributed to the lives of people. We've never hear about positive stories about how people had been putting aside or working together throughout their lives, and later on that fund helped them overcome those difficulties. These are the sort of stories we need to build upon.
All right. Next question concerns foreign direct investment, the remittances, and investor confidence that needs to be boosted. What measures need to be taken through this budget and post-budget? Starting with you, Usman.
Thank you. I think as Shaaf Najeeb Saab mentioned, the signaling has to be very, very strong, that economy is the foremost consideration, and that political infighting will not get in the way of good business. Even if people have disagreements, the fact is that the economy should be first and foremost the priority, and that investors will be protected, they will be respected, they will be allowed to do business without many hassles, and therefore everything will be all right for them. With that state of mind, you don't even need FDI in the sense of foreigners doing direct investment. Your own local capital is very large, and that includes the overseas Pakistani. This will be the linchpin of any development story that Pakistan experiences over the next 100 years.
All right, Shaaf, we have to be very quick. We're very short of time. Shaaf, what are your 2 cents on this?
I think we first need to develop the local investors' confidence, because once that is restored, then that's how we can attract FDI, first through partnership between the local investors and the foreigners, and then direct investment from them as well. So I think the first key is investing in our local investor and building its confidence, so that once we have a stable investment opportunity, only then will foreign investors be attracted towards the country.
All right, final comment, Shimail.
Well, I think the protection of the investor, and specifically from the judiciary, from the contracts, that has to be guaranteed, and there is no room for the sort of populist decisions we've seen in the past in terms of judicial populist decisions. They cannot be the hearsay. This needs to be led by serious investors. Will only come when they see that their rights are protected.
All right. Thank you so very much to all 3 of my guests, Dr. Shimail Daud, Economist, President of the Rawalpindi Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Usman Chohan, leading economist, another leading economist, Muhammad Shaaf Najeeb. Thank you to all 3 of you to have joined us for this pre-budget debate and to have discussed different aspects of it, how to move forward, what needs to be done, what does not need to be done, what are the policies that we need to apply, what are the policies that we need to discard. A lot of that will be discussed in the days to come, but we are all the eyes currently are on the budget that is going to be presented in the Parliament. Allah Hafiz.